So a few moments ago, we heard Géraldine Pons for Eurosport and Warner Brothers Discovery. Now we're going to hand over to France Television's Laurent Eric Lelay is with us. The games were broadcast and the Paralympic Games were broadcast on France Television with Laurent Eric Lelay for about 10-15 minutes. Laurent. Hello, thank you, Gaël, thank you, Lucien, for inviting me to be here. I don't know if Géraldine showed a short film earlier, I think she probably did, but just in case, I have a short video of 1 minute just to remind us of the atmosphere of the Games. Thank you. So it was a great moment. I have the impression it was many years ago, but in fact, it was just a few weeks ago. And what I wanted to tell you about today is how, at France Television, we presented these two fantastic events to the French people. And to begin, I'd like to go back 6 years in time, the 23rd of June 2017. That's the date of Olympic Day, and at that time, Paris was just a candidate city to organize the Games. And to show the determination of Paris to hold extraordinary Games, the candidacy committee had the incredible idea of building an athletics track on the Seine, on a floating barge on the river. Teddy Riner ran a 100-meter race. Emmanuel Macron, who had just been elected, came there to play tennis and gave his first interview as president to us at France Television to bring his support to the French bid. At that time, France Television did not yet have the broadcasting rights for the Games of 2024, but we decided to cover the event live because for France Television it was the first signal to position ourselves as the obvious natural broadcaster of the Games with the legitimacy to broadcast what was just a project at the time. After that, you know the rest of the story. The CIO awarded the organization of the Games to Paris a little later, on the 13th of September 2017. Warner Bros. Discovery gave us the grants granted the rights a little later, and also from the organizing committee for the Paralympic Games. So there, at this point, we now held the rights to this immense event with the huge responsibility of being the media that has to bring the Games to life for French people. For that, our president, Delphine Ernotte, asked us, and I quote her here, "I want for the next year France Television to make the Olympic and Paralympic Games an immense public celebration, and that it should be the most unforgettable event on French television." So very high ambitions, and that's why we designed an editorial setup which had of a kind never seen before in France, with not only the sports department, but the whole of the company. As you know, often in the media and in television, editorial treatment of a major sporting event begins a few days or weeks before, but for the Olympic and Paralympic Games of Paris, our idea was to begin our editorial treatment much further in advance to tell the story of the preparation and to amplify this little by little to boost the interest of the public and to get them more and more interested in the event, which at that time was a fundamental issue. So there were different announcements of the organizing committee. On the 14th of November 2022, for example, Tony Estanguet announced the mascots of the games, and we hosted them in the evening news on France 2. There was a lot of talk about that at the time, before they became one of the key symbols of these Olympic Games. But it was 1 year before that our editorial approach really stepped up. On the 25th of July 2023, about 1 year before the Games, we decided to organize a major concert in front of Paris City Hall. And the day before, we launched a daily 26-minute program called Aux Jeux Citoyens every evening on France Television to talk about the Olympic Games every evening beginning from September 2023. We would broadcast more and more reports or documentaries on the athletes, the games in our news programs, regional news programs, overseas also, and in all our sports programs. We did more and we covered more and more of the qualifiers for the different Olympic events. We even broadcast the draw for the football, for the men's and women's football tournaments. And it was on the 8th of May 2024 that we stepped up this whole approach. That was the arrival of the flame in Marseille. On France 2, the whole day was dedicated to the event with special programs and even a major concert in the evening from the port of Marseille. A rap concert, I don't know if you remember, and broadcasting rap on a major mainstream channel in France is rare, especially as it was at the same time as the Champions League final on another channel, but we still drew a large audience, and France 2 was the #1 channel for its audiences that day, and more than 200,000 French people were there in the port of Marseille for the concert, which surprised many people. That was perhaps the first sign of the expectations the French had for these Olympic Games. But this day of the 8th of May also marked the launch of our digital challenge, our digital channel, Paris 2024, which we announced that day because we wanted to propose something which had never been done before, which was to follow the route of the Olympic flame live over the whole distance, to follow the flame live and to see all the steps and stages, all the people who are very proud to carry it, and also all the French people who stood along the route of the flame. So we continued with our programs. Obviously, we broadcast a lot of documentaries, including a famous one by the Noudet brothers on the behind the scenes for the preparation of the games. There were too many things for me to tell you about them all here, but what I'm trying to explain is that we did a lot of things over a very long period to try to reach all the French people. Just to give you an idea of audiences, for the Aux Jeux Citoyens program, which was every evening, on average, depending on the evenings, there would be slightly over 1 million viewers. It's a lot, but in prime time, you sometimes get programs which do much bigger audiences. So that was the average for each program. But if you look at the reach, the number of different people who watched the program over the year, Media Métrie says the figure is 46 million. 46 million French people watched this program at some point during the year. And so these are all little bricks to build the edifice to reach a lot of French people and to boost their interest in the Olympic Games. And I think for us, one of the objectives was that they should really take ownership of the Games. One of the challenges of the Games, that it shouldn't just be a Parisian event, it should be for the whole of France. And then came the Games. For the Games, we decided to really try to make sure that the decision of the organising committee to create spectacular games should be a success by dedicating 3 television channels to broadcasting of the Olympic Games, with the aim being to offer the French their place in the front row to follow the events free of charge. And our idea was that our 2 main channels, France 2 and France 3, should broadcast the games all day, even in prime time, with the sole exception of the evening news programs or religious programs. So it's quite a daring event, quite a daring approach, especially in prime time. Is there really a big enough audience to watch the Olympic Games on 2 main national channels all day long? It's something that's never been done. In London, at the time of the London Olympics, which were a great success, the BBC had just BBC One dedicated to the Games. And so we put in a 3rd channel, digital channel, called Paris 2024, and then each channel had its own positioning. France 2 was for more the major events, France 3 for the team sports, and France 2024 for the youth sports. And then we tried also to always offer 3 choices to respond as precisely as possible to the expectations and to the different appetites of French people. And 3 choices also to enable everybody to discover sports and events that they would never have seen otherwise. And in a way, this rich offer was there to respond to the demand, but I would say that this also contributed to creating more demand. So our strategy was quantitative but also qualitative. We needed an iconic place, which is why we chose the... Sorry, this isn't the right photograph. That's the Paralympic Games. This is the right photograph. So we chose the roof of the Musée de l'Homme opposite the Eiffel Tower, the key symbol of the Games, which was from where French people could follow our coverage of the Games. There was unprecedented mobilization of all our journalists with the support of recognized, renowned consultants. The journalists and consultants and experts are very, very important. These are the people who bring the event really to life, who have to tell people about things, explain things. There are some sports that we only see during the Olympic Games and where the rules need to be explained, the rules that can sometimes be subtle. And also these experts are there to share the emotions with us, the emotions that come from the exploits of our athletes. And then late in the evening, we would have a prestige program, Quel Jeu, in the Club France, which was an opportunity for everybody to enjoy the highlights of the day and to welcome the many French medal winners. Regarding the French medal winners, there's one other point I would like to stress, which is that the viewers like to watch the Olympic Games for the event. But we also need to bear in mind that they like to see their athletes, the country's athletes, the French athletes, which is why our very first editorial promise was the chance to follow our athletes and to broadcast each of their medals live, that we should not miss a single medal won by any French person, and that all this should be shown live, even if we had to do something France Television had never done before. We even did away with one evening news program on Friday, the 9th of August, the men's football final between France and Spain. The match begins at 8 p.m. and the French, and it was 3-1 against, and they came back to 3-3. It couldn't switch to the other channel because the athletics was starting, so we made the decision to propose to extend the coverage of the match through to 8:45, and therefore to quite simply do away altogether with the evening news for the first time ever in the history of the channel. It was a great moment, even if the Spanish proved to have the upper hand. But that is a great memory for us. So that was our first editorial promise. But the second promise was to be able to follow the key foreign sports people creating their legends at the game. Simone Biles, Simon Duplantis breaking a world record. The French people wanted to see the return of Nadal to the site of the French Open. They wanted to know who was going to win the 100-meter race, and French viewers wanted to share in these stories and these events, and this was very, very important for us, that they should be able to. So we made another innovation I would like to emphasize on our Paris 2024 digital channel. We gave everybody watching the channel the opportunity to interact with the commentators and presenters, and that channel was moderated by YouTubers or people who are used to this exchange with the audience via a screen, and we wanted to have this interactive tool with the audience, and that was provided to everybody. So we created a whole setup that was very ambitious, and also at the same time taking the risk and wondering whether there would be enough French people who would be there to make it worthwhile to have broadcast all these events over all of this time. If we go back to Friday 26th of July, the opening ceremony, France had a special edition all day. From our studio on the Trocadero, I was there with them, constantly with my eye on my telephone, not to keep an eye on Instagram, but looking at the Rain Today app, because we could see these clouds approaching Paris ominously, at a time when the organizing committee was proposing to organize the most beautiful opening ceremony ever under the rain on the river. So I was there alongside the commentators at the beginning. The ceremony and the rain started at exactly the same moment. So at 9 o'clock, and what we do every day is to watch the audiences each day, and on the Saturday morning we looked with the president of the channel and the different people coordinating the coverage. We had all made bets about how many people would be watching the opening ceremony, and in fact it was the most optimistic people who were right, because you may remember, but the opening ceremony hit an historic audience for television in France, with more than 24 million viewers. And the ceremony began, but despite all those contrary winds and obstacles before the game, all the problems disappeared. On Saturday morning, the competitions began. The French discovered magnificent stadia and enthusiastic crowds. France won medals quickly, and at 7 minutes past 8, Antoine Dupont and his colleagues won the gold medal live on television. That evening, the news started at a little bit late, just after 8 o'clock, and France 2 and France 3 were the top audiences for the whole of that day. That Saturday, as they were the rest of the week. The next day, Pauline Ferrand-Prévot, on the Sunday, won a gold medal. On Monday, they began with the magnificent week of Léon Marchand. At the end of the week, there was Teddy Riner, and then through to the end of the games, there were the wonderful adventures of all our team sports And there were more than 60 million French people who watched the games on our channels, and each of those French people, on average, watched more than 24 hours of the Olympic Games. And if you work that out, that's more than 1.6 billion hours of television consumed. The digital channel reached 11 million viewers, and I mentioned earlier the interactive aspect, and more than 1 million people used that. More than 200,000 people took part in the chat and interacted. We didn't answer all of them, but they could ask questions or take part in surveys. The games ended with a closing ceremony with 17 million viewers, and we thought we could take a break, but we had to start all over again for the Paralympic Games. And also for the Paralympic Games, we chose to propose the broadcasting of the event 24 hours a day, alternating between France 2 and France 3, and to propose all the events on our France.tv platform. And in many ways, this is more important than the games themselves because it reaches beyond the mere framework of sport and addresses the role of disability in our society. And broadcasting these Paralympic Games after the Olympic Games was really an imperative for us and our channel. We were lucky to have a record number of events, and France Television took part. We produced 5 sports directly. And after the magnificent studio on the Trocadero, we had to find a new iconic venue. So we set up on the other photograph you saw before, which we can now show you again, in front of the Arc de Triomphe, which was the monument, which was the symbol of the Paralympic Games. Like for the Games, we had a large team of journalists and consultants who had an even more important role to play here, because as you know, para sports perhaps need a bit more explanation. We need to talk about the events and disciplines. We need to explain how they work, the rankings. You know that between men and women events together, there are more than 29 100-meter finals. All of this trying to find the right balance so that French people could appreciate the competitions. And then the Quel Jeu program came back every evening at the end of the day's events. It's always difficult to know in advance how enthusiastic people will be about the Paralympic Games. The holidays are over, they're back to work, and we had never broadcast the Paralympic Games to such an extent. The only indication we had was that the seats in the stadiums had sold very, very well. On Thursday, the 29th of August, the day after the opening ceremony, which was a magnificent moment on Place de la Concorde, which became a giant stage for the evening, more than 11 million people watched that on France 2, and on Thursday, the 29th of August, the competitions began. And at 9:10, it was time to switch from France 2 to France 3, while the news was on France 2. But we faced a problem. There were no longer any disciplines to show live. So we no longer had any disciplines to show live, and so we went for a plan B, which was to show the first match of the French wheelchair rugby event. Showing an event like this, like wheelchair rugby, which isn't well known among French people, showing a match which the French lost and which had already been played beforehand, where people knew the results. Obviously, this was a risk, and it had been mentioned in the news. So throughout the evening, we worried about what the audience might be. We thought to ourselves, if we're going to start the broadcast with a very poor audience in prime time, that will be problematic. And the next day, at 9, we received the audiences, and we got the pleasant surprise to see that the match had got more than 12 points of market share, more than 12 million viewers. better than a normal Thursday evening on France 2, and even better than that, the Paralympic Games on that Thursday had mainly been shown on France 2, and France 2 was the most watched channel that day on French television. The magic of the Games continued to operate. French people watched the Paralympic Games, and at the end of the Paralympic Games, more than 50 million people, 78% of the population, had watched, and the 15 to 24-year-old age group had watched in the large majority, and 66% had watched the Paralympic Games. One final figure that I like is the audience for the final of the blind football between France and Argentina, where we got our revenge with the penalty shootout, and more than 5 million people watched that blind football French team win and show all their talent. So it all came to an end on Saturday, the 14th of September, with the parade, a magnificent ceremony at the Arc de Triomphe, and that marked the end of our marvellous Olympic summer. At France Television, and we are very proud of this, we received a lot of praise for our coverage of the Olympic Games. It's something we're very proud of. It's good for the image of our group, for all our people, for all the teams who worked on the Games, and it's also a great demonstration that the public service is of such importance to French people to be able to offer this sort of event. This success, I would like to underline this, is also very much due to the close ties we had with the organising committee. We never had any doubts about the ambitious project of Tony Estanguet and his teams, and we really focused on developing our editorial project with the same ambitious approach. The fervour of the audience in the stadia really was incredible. Seeing the Stade de France full from the very first hours, earliest hours in the morning for the heats in athletics was really very impressive. And it really gave the viewers a desire to watch. Thank you to all the sports people and the para sports people to have taken part in the game. Thank you also to the French sports people, above all, I would like to say, to have done their job so well and to have brought back so many medals. And also thank you to the French to have placed their trust in us and watched this. And thank you. And now there's a short film which we showed just after the Paralympic Games.
Or, argent, bronze, des records et les plus belles émotions. Nos athlètes olympiques et paralympiques nous ont fait vibrer au-delà de toutes nos espérances.
Championne paralympique à domicile.
139 médailles pour les tricolores, du jamais vu. Un spectacle quotidien inoubliable et beaucoup de joie dans tout le pays. Bravo et merci à tous ces champions qui se sont dépassés. Vous avez été 60 millions de Français à vivre l'événement grâce au dispositif exceptionnel que nous avons déployé sur nos antennes. Merci à vous. Nous sommes fiers d'avoir été le diffuseur officiel de Paris 2024.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Laurent Éric Lelay.